Welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George Isted, the Solent Boat Butler. This is, as you can probably imagine if you watch my show regularly, a Contessa 32, and it's one of our family boats. She's very, very dirty on the bottom, so in this episode we're going to be putting her on a scrubbing grid, getting that bottom clean so we can go sailing on her without dragging all that weed around underwater. So this is a 1978 Contessa 32. I have done a bit of work on her over the years, and it was 2 years ago that I did a full osmosis treatment on the bottom, and I also put in a new engine in the engine bay as well, because that was getting a little long in the tooth. And unfortunately, because I've been away sailing and she hasn't really been used, she's been sat in the marina for the last 2 years, almost to the day, and she's just been collecting weed upon weed on the bottom. It's about time we give her a clean. We want to go and use her next weekend for a sailing event, and unfortunately her bottom's in no fit state, and at this time of year I couldn't get her out of the water for a proper clean up, anti-foul polish and all the rest of it, so it's just going to be a quick one. We're going to stick her on a scrubbing grid, wait for the tide to drop, give her a clean, wait for the tide to come up, put her back on the berth, and then she's going to be ready to go, albeit not polished and beautified, but she will sail okay, so that's the most important thing. So come along for the ride. I'll tell you how we are going to go about doing that, and you will hopefully learn a few tips and tricks along the way. As a quick drive-by, here is how she looks on the water. I'm afraid I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's an awful lot of weed hanging off the bottom, which is not a good sight. Don't like dirty boats, and but she's a really nice example. There is some bits and pieces that would be nice to do. There's the cockpit, and down below I've got the oven on and some food in the oven because I'm going to be spending the night on her, and then at 3 a.m. in the morning it's going to be high water, so I'm going to be up in the wee small hours driving her just around the corner. Over there in the distance, over there is a sailing club I'm a member of, which has a scrubbing grid, so I'm going to be putting her on the scrubbing grid and then tying her up and waiting for the tide to drop. But there's a little bit more to it than that, and I'll talk to you about that as we do it. So I've brought you inside the boat now because as much as it's lovely and sunny out there, it is pretty windy, and I'm not sure how much of the noise is coming through on my mic. I've got a little fluffy on it, but I'm not sure how well that works because this is my new microphone, which was bought using the donations that I get to this channel. If you want to donate to this channel, there's a link in the description, but don't worry, if you don't want to, it's fine. You can enjoy it and just feel guilty afterwards. Anyway, the plan is to go on the scrubbing grid at high water at 0300 tomorrow morning. So what we will do is position the boat alongside 2 piles and put some fenders longitudinally along the side of the boat, so we will be positioned alongside those piles with the fenders between the hull and the piles, and then as the boat goes down on the tide I will stay awake until the boat has touched down, so the keel is going to hit the concrete base of the scrubbing pad, and I'll possibly have to just push those fenders down just to make sure they don't ride up as the boat settles down onto its keel, and then once it's settled I'll just make sure all the lines are tight just to make sure that the boat isn't going to move too far. I might possibly take the anchor off the bow and just put it on the side deck on the side that we're going to want to lean the boat into slightly, but we don't want to lean the boat in too much, so that we want all the weight really on the keel and just 5 degrees or 10 degrees at the most really of the boat heeling in, but the less heel the better. Actually, it might feel like it's the wrong thing to do, but you just want a small amount of heel. You've got to remember all the weight on these boats is in the keel. It's a 4.5 ton boat with 2.5 tons of lead in the keel, so most of the weight is going to be sitting on the concrete and a small amount of weight is going to be sitting on those fenders, just very slightly pushing against the piles that the boat is going to be secured to. Once she's settled, I'm going to go back and get another couple of hours of sleep, and then hopefully by about 6:30 in the morning I'll be able to get up, have a cup of tea and get my pressure washer out and give the bottom a good blast all over, because the tide will be away, and I will have probably 2 to 3 hours of time under the boat when I won't have to use wellies to keep my feet dry, and I'll be able to clean the bottom. I want to service the prop and clean the prop because the prop is very, very dirty at the moment. I can only achieve about 2,500 RPM on the engine with the engine absolutely flat out, and I know from experience be able to achieve at least 3,500 RPM with the engine flat out, so I know the prop is really quite dirty. There's also an anode that I need to change on the prop. I want to pump it full of fresh grease because it's a Darglow feathering prop, just to keep that nice and lubricated. And then I'm going to have a shower, get clean, wait for the tide to come back up, and then around about 2 p.m, maybe certainly 3 p.m, I'll be able to have the boat afloat and drive it back round to the marina berth here. So that is the plan. Come along for the ride and I will update you probably 0300 when we start the engine and motor around there in the pitch black. It's just a few minutes past 3 a.m. and as you can see it is all dark out here. We're just motoring around. That's the fuel pier next to the marina, which we have to go around to get to the club where we'll be using the scrubbing grid. So there's not a lot to see, I'm afraid. So I will concentrate on where I am going. But over there is the very pretty Spinnaker Tower. It's a bit dark to see, but we are now alongside the two piles that we'll be drying the boat out against. So you can see the forward one there is alongside a big fender, the aft pile there alongside a big fender, and we have lines going from bow and stern onto the pile. So stern line coming onto that pile, and I've kind of got a breast line which is loose at the moment just around the base of the mast, which I'll snug up once the boat is down, and then you can see a bow line there. So effectively we've got two springs because one's coming aft, one's going forward, but it holds the boat. And I'm going to do a quick tidal calc to work out what time the boat is likely to touch down, and then possibly go to bed for 20 minutes or half an hour. And then once the tide starts dropping quickly, I'll just need to monitor those fenders just to make sure they don't ride up as the boat drops against the pile. Anywho, it's very late at night, no one's around, so I'll see you in the morning. It is just after 7 o'clock in the morning and the very last of the water around the keel is draining away, and the bottom is looking, as expected, pretty disgusting. Lots and lots of weed around the waterline, which you could see when we were afloat in the marina, but the whole of the bottom is pretty gross. So I have my pressure washer out over there, plumbed in, almost ready to go. I just need to put some dirty clothes on and then my wellies, and we can give that a clean. But it might be time for a cup of tea first, just to let the last of that water drain away. I'm just in the edit now for this video, and it occurred to me that it would be useful to you if I go through in a little bit more detail the calculation that you'll need to do if you're planning to use a scrubbing grid. I'm going to draw probably really badly on that thing in a minute, but I wanted to just say that I'm going to be using the data for the boat that I'm putting on there and the scrubbing grid that I'm using. You will have to look up that information for your particular boat and your particular chosen scrubbing grid, and then you can do the calculation based on that. Here's my scrappy drawing of a scrubbing grid. This is a representative of the one that I used. The ones that are available around the country may look different to this. It may be a harbour wall, it may be multiple piles. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But the key thing that you need to know is the drying height. So that is the height at which the keel will no longer be sat in the water. So the drying height for the one at my club is 2.1 metres. I've written it on there. So when the tide drops below 2.1 meters, the boat will be completely high and dry. Now, my boat that I put on there was a Contessa. It has a draft of approximately 1.7 meters. So what we can do is we can say, when that's covered with water, I need at least 1.7 in here to float the boat onto the scrubbing grid. So ideally you want a bit more than 1.7, but if we were going for the absolute bare minimum, 1.7 plus 2.1 gives us a tidal height of 3.8. So 3.8 is the absolute bare minimum where we might be able to just about scrape the boat onto the scrubbing grid. Ideally, we'd be looking for a bit more than that. I would like, say, 30 centimetres at least above that, maybe 40. So if we say 3.8 is the minimum, then I'm generally looking for a tidal height of 4.1, 4.2, which gives me a little bit of wiggle room for getting the boat on and getting it off again the next day. Because that's the other key thing, is you need to look at the height of the tide for the tide when you're putting it on the scrubbing grid, but you also need to check the height of the tide when you're going to be taking it off again, because if you are going from springs to neaps, the height of the tide will become less, as opposed to going between neaps and springs when the height of the tide will be becoming more. So the other thing you might want to check is the height of low tide, because that also affects the whether you're going to be paddling around in welly boots or whether you're going to be high and dry, which is all good. So that is essentially it. You're going to bring your boat in at high water. It's going to come in. If we just imagine that is the underwater shape of a boat, there's going to be a rudder in there as well because we want to steer it. So that's the water line. Oh dear, this is a terrible boat, isn't it? There's a sail. Okay, so we're going to bring our boat in. We're going to have, say, 2 meters of depth there. We need 1.7. As the tide goes down, that's going to dry out. That water's going to disappear and end up down here somewhere at low water. We can do all the work we need to do, and then once the bottom is nice and clean, water will rise, we will float off, and everything is good in the world. The one thing that's probably worth me adding is it's also worth considering the pressure of the weather system that you're in at the time, because high pressure can cause the height of tide, which is calculated by in your tide tables. It may cause the height of the tide to be less. Likewise, if you have low pressure, the height may be more, and that affects not only high tide but low water as well. So where you gain on one, you lose on the other. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's 1,000 millibars that is generally used for calculating tidal heights, and above or below that will affect the height of tide. So you can see there the fender at the front doing its job. I ended up stuffing a second fender in behind on there, and that's doing its job nicely. There is a little bit more of a heel on than I would like, but it's perfectly fine as it is. From up here you can see how much heel I've got on there. It's a little bit more than ideal really. I think I said earlier that you want 5 to 10 degrees. Ignore that. You probably want about 2 to 5 degrees of heel as a maximum, ideally, just to get as much weight on the keel and as little weight on the pilot as possible. And I'm probably at the top end of that, really. As no great issue, but the fenders that I'm using, I've borrowed, are really, really soft. So the boat has kind of squished them down a little bit, so that's resulted in a bit more heel than I would normally go for, but it's absolutely fine.
Style. Style is the answer to everything. A fresh way to approach a dull or dangerous thing. To do a dangerous thing with style is what I call art.
side done, time to do the other. I think this side might actually be slightly more weedy. Now it's quite an interesting selection of kind of marine life attached to the propeller. Most of that's come off, but some of it hasn't. I do wonder if washing a boat with a pressure washer is a little bit like watching people doing sanding, which people seem to like me doing, so I will continue. There we go, looking pretty clean now. The only bits that I'm going to have to put a bit more attention into is down here at the bottom of the keel. It's been sitting in the mud and that stops the anti-foul from working, kind of clogs it up, and you can see there's a little bit of coral worm down there, which I'm going to have to go and take a scraper to, and then maybe something a bit more abrasive just to clean up the anti-foul. And there's the prop. Had quite a selection of different sea creatures growing on that. Some of them are still there. I don't know what that is, and that's going to get a clean up, a service, a new anode on the back, and then she'll be all good. In fact, I've missed a bit of weed there. I'll have to come back and do that. Well, the bottom is clean. The next job is to clean the prop and service it. So before I get into the servicing proper, there's all this kind of scale stuff off the sea creatures that grow. So this is basically calcium carbonate. You can scrape it off, or you can use a wire wheel, but that tends to remove a bit of the prop material. So I use science, and that means I actually use acid. So this is fairly unpleasant stuff. I should be wearing a mask and some safety glasses, but for the purpose of being able to speak to video, all I do is I get my brush in there and paint on the acid, and you can see that fizzing away rapidly. So it doesn't damage the metal, but if I do this over and over again, slowly, all that calcium carbonate, you can see already the stainless steel blade is appearing, and I will keep going like this until it's all shiny and clean. So as you can see, all nice and clean now. I cleaned that up with the acid as I showed you, and then I gave it a little rub over with a Scotch-Brite pad, so it all looks nice and clean. Now, if you have one of these props, this is a Mark IV. Mark IIIs and earlier props are slightly different, but on the latest version, you have a little grub screw here, and it's essential that you put some grease in your prop at least once a year. Ideally, it does two things. It lubricates everything, but it also dampens the motion. When you go from forward to reverse, these blades spin round potentially quite quickly, and just having it packed full of grease just dampens that movement and just protects the internals of the prop, particularly the prop pitch stops. So all we need to do is get a little Allen key, pop it in, and we can undo this little grub screw, and then we will pop in a little grease nipple. You'll be able to see that once it's in, maybe a bit more clearly. Do it up reasonably firmly. I'm just going to put this down so I don't lose it. Then get your grease gun. There are lots of different types of grease gun. This is just my preferred one. It's really old. Stick that on the end there, and then I'll normally have the blades all the way around in one direction and start pumping a bit of grease in. And then I'll move the blades a bit, and you can see water's dripping out of there as I pump it full of grease, because all the grease that was in there has worked its way out through the use of the prop. So I'm going to twist the blade around a bit more. And I keep doing this until I just start seeing grease coming out of the prop. Sometimes it comes out of the front, sometimes it comes out around the blades where they go into the hub. So I'll give it a little work like that. And then I'll stick a bit more in. This hasn't been done for 2 years, so it possibly needs a bit more grease than it would need if it had been done only 6 months ago. But as you do it, you feel the blades firming up as you're turning them ever so slightly, which is what you want. And I'm just starting to see a little bit of grease coming out of the gap there between the two halves of the hub. So a couple more pumps and I think we'll call that done. So with that done, I can take the grease nipple out, pop the grub screw back in there, and then the next really important thing is to replace the anode, which is right on the back here. It's held by two Allen key cap heads, I think they're called. So we'll back those out, get the new anode, put some thread locker on the screws, and then put them back in. It's really important to use thread locker on the screws because it stops the whole thing vibrating loose in use, and I have seen that happen. So bit of thread lock, do it up tight, and that's your prop good for another year. Well, we will take this anode off next, and there we go. Sometimes there's enough space to turn the Allen key in front of the rudder, but I'm starting to run out of space as it comes out, so go. That's the old anode. There's actually quite a lot of material still on this one, which is surprising, but the boat also has a hull anode up there which is electrically bonded to the prop, so I suspect that has saved this anode from being worn away as much as it would otherwise be. So we're going to stick a new one on there, but before I do that, the important thing is to clean up this back surface, because we want to get a good electrical bond between the new anode and that, and there's just a little bit of limescale left over there which I will scrape off. I'll just give that a little wipe. So here's my little tube of thread locker, or Loctite, which is the brand name. I'm just going to put a little blob on each of those, and I'll give that to my camera holding assistant, and then position this back on the rudder, back on the prop I mean, and then feel around for the hole, and that's the first one started. And now in fast forward you can watch me do this up. Well done. Beautiful. It's just about 1:45 now and the boat is virtually afloat. I think it's just the very front edge of the keel is being held, but I think in 5 or 10 minutes the boat will be completely afloat. We'll be able to push it backwards, start the engine and put her back on her berth. So mission complete. The boat is successfully cleaned, the prop is successfully serviced, and she's ready to go sailing without dragging around a carpet of weed. There she is, looking nice and clean. I've also had a chance to clean some of the teak, not all of it unfortunately, but it's looking certainly a lot better, and I'll get back and finish the teak at some point, I expect. Well, we've moved the boat back down to the marina where she lives, and she was much faster on the way back than she was taking her to the scrubbing grid with that nice clean bottom. And that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope that was interesting for you, and do be careful if you want to dry your own boat out. It's not particularly difficult, just requires a little bit of common sense, and maybe have a look online as well at some advice there if you haven't done it before. But it's a good cheap way of cleaning the bottom of your boat if you have the ability to use a scrubbing grid. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.